Welcome back. Today we are starting our first set of notes for Unit 4 on agriculture. Our agriculture unit is broken down into two pieces, commercial agriculture and subsistence agriculture. Today we will be looking at commercial agriculture. Your two essential questions for today are, how have agricultural practices changed throughout history? And what are the characteristics of commercial agriculture? So, early agriculture began around the year 10,000 BCE. Right? The first humans started as hunting and gathering based societies, meaning they followed their food sources from place to place. Then, around the year 10,000 BCE, we have something called the Neolithic Agricultural Revolution, or the first agricultural revolution. This is when humans figured out that if they scattered seeds on the ground and then watered them, plants could grow, and then they could consume those plants for food. This first agricultural revolution led early humans to transition from being hunting and gathering based societies to being more permanent agriculture based societies. And this was largely based on environmental and cultural factors. So, what they grew and where they grew it depended on where these early peoples lived. Along with the ability to grow crops, early humans also began to domesticate other animals. So that meant keeping animals and raising them and then benefiting from those animals. So eventually sacrificing them and using them for food and various other things. So the different hearths, or these different areas where agriculture started, are tied with where early civilizations began. So in Southwest Asia, you have Mesopotamia, which is the ancient civilization there, and they began by growing and domesticating barley and wheat. In East Asia, so here we have ancient China, you have the growing and domestication of rice and millet. In Central Africa, which is where you have the earliest humans, you have the domestication of rice. And then in Latin America, where you have early American civilizations, you have the domestication of beans, cotton, potatoes, and corn. So this map shows just the different areas about those early domestications and kind of where they spread. So you can see in Latin America, early domestication is here in this kind of like gray bubble. So these are where the earliest humans began to grow the food, and then it spread throughout the continent. Same thing here with Africa, Southwest Asia, East Asia, and Oceania area. Okay. Again, along with the domestication of plants, so the growing of plants, humans began to domesticate animals or keep animals that traveled with them. So you have turkeys and llamas and alpacas in the Americas, and then goats, sheep, pigs, dogs, and cattle throughout what was Mesopotamia, and then horses in the northern part of Asia, and then chicken and cattle in the southern part of Asia. Then you fast forward to the Columbian Exchange. So this is when Europeans begin to sail across the ocean and encounter indigenous peoples in the Americas. You have the exchange of goods and food during this process. So the Columbian Exchange, from the Americas to Europe, you have all of these different types of foods. And then from Europe and Africa to the Americas, you have all these other types of foods. Then you also have animals and diseases that came with this Columbian Exchange as well. So a lot of the foods that Europeans eat today originated in the Americas, okay, such as potatoes and corn and tomatoes. Question number 1. What do we call the first agricultural revolution in human history? It is called the Neolithic Agricultural Revolution because it occurred during the Neolithic time period. So, talking about modern agriculture, we have lots of different types of agriculture around the world that depends on a country's level of development, their climate, and their culture. And when we talk about agriculture, we're talking about two different kinds of agriculture. We are talking about subsistence agriculture and commercial agriculture. Subsistence agriculture is agriculture or the growing of food for one's personal consumption. And subsistence agriculture is the type of agriculture that you are going to find in your less developed countries. Okay, this is personal farming. People are only producing enough food to feed their families. On the flip side of things, you have commercial agriculture. And commercial agriculture is the production of food for sale. So these are the types of farms that you find in your more developed country, these mega farms that are producing tons and tons and tons of food and then selling that food for an income and making a profit. This map shows the different types of agricultures that are found throughout the world. Okay? When we look at our commercial agriculture, these are the agricultures that are going to be in more of the kind of like red and yellow and brown tones. And then your subsistence agricultures or in your less developed countries are going to be more kind of your blue and green tone colors. So getting into the different types of commercial agriculture. The first one we are going to take a look at is mixed crop and livestock farming. And mixed crop and livestock farming is common in the central United States and Europe. Okay, and mixed crop and livestock is exactly what it sounds like. It's a combination of farms that have different types of crops and animals. And on these farms, the crops or the actual like fields or the food are used to feed the livestock. So usually the crops that are grown are either corn or soybeans. Okay, and then you have something that's called crop rotation. So each year farmers plant their fields in a slightly different location to help maintain high yields. So they're not depleting the soil year after year after year. And then what farmers do is they use the crops that they're growing to feed their animals. And then they make their money by selling their animals. Okay, so each year when new animals are born, they continually like replace their livestock. The benefits of mixed crop and livestock farming are that you have a distributed workload, meaning that you work consistently year round. So in your spring and your planting season, and in your fall and your harvesting season, you have a little bit lighter load with your livestock because either your animals are pregnant or you will have just sold a bunch. And then in the winter and in the summer, when your crops are more stable, then you can have a surplus of your livestock when you are buying more animals or working on getting them ready to sell. So currently, this map shows corn for grain in the United States. So these are all areas where farms produce corn for animal feed. So the majority of your farms in your Midwest are going to be mixed crop and livestock farms. Okay. Same thing with soybeans, right? Most of the farms here in Minnesota are either corn or soybean farms. So we see this type of farming a lot in our area. Okay, and then hogs and pigs, you notice that they're in the same area as the corn and the soybean farms because farmers use the corn and the soybeans to feed their pigs. Okay, question number 2. What are the benefits of mixed crop and livestock farming? Your answer is going to be all of the above. You have a distributed workload, you have a stable year-round income, you have year-long attention to product, and you have market access. Okay, question or second type of commercial agriculture is going to be dairy farming. Okay, and dairy farming is often located near urban areas due to its market access. Okay, and that's because this is what we call like the milk shed trend. And that's because dairy products are easily volatile, meaning they can go bad very quick. They have a very short shelf life. So you don't want to be shipping your milk products across the country because by the time you get your milk products across the country, they're going to be spoiled. They're no longer going to be good. So instead, your dairy farms are often just outside of major cities, so you can quickly get your product to market and on the shelves to sell to your consumers. Currently, dairy farming is growing in your less developed countries. India is currently the #1 world producer in dairy products. And in dairy farming, your milk is sold to retailers or processors where your final form of your product depends on the distance to markets. Okay, so your cheese factories or cheese retailers are going to be further outside of the cities than your actual milk processors, because milk will spoil faster than cheese. And like ice cream, right, is even further away, because ice cream you can put in the freezer for a long time. The challenges of dairy farming is that it has an excessive workload for very little profit. You have to have a year-long attention to your product, meaning cows don't just take a season off, right? Like you don't get the winter off. You're constantly milking your cows every single day, twice a day. There's high costs of feedings in the winter when there's snow on the ground and cows don't have access to grass or hay. And then fluctuating milk prices really drive the industry. So you're dependent on those milk prices. Okay. So this map shows the milk cow inventory throughout the United States. And then world milk production. So remember, India is currently the world's #1 dairy producer. Question number 3. Why do dairy farms often need to be near urban areas? Your answer is going to be market access, right? You want to get your product to market as fast as you can because dairy is a volatile product. Right? It can spoil very quickly. The longer it is in transit time, the less shelf time you have and the less money you are going to make. The next type of commercial agriculture is grain farming. Okay, grain farming is exactly what it sounds like. These are your big, huge fields that are growing wheat, corn, oats, barley, rice, millet, any other grains. And these crops are grown primarily for human consumption. The world's #1 exported crop is wheat currently. Okay, so wheat is going to be your most important type of grain for grain farming. And that's because wheat can be ground down into flour, and you can use flour for pretty much anything. The United States is currently the world leader in grain production. So in the wintertime, you have a special kind of wheat called winter wheat that is grown in Kansas, Colorado, and Oklahoma. So areas that don't get as cold as the Midwest. And then in the spring and summer, you have another type of wheat called spring wheat that's grown more in the Dakotas and Montana. And then other grains are grown in parts of Washington. Okay, so on this map here, this is your spring and summer wheat, so areas where it's warmer in the summer. And this is going to be your winter wheat, so areas where you don't get as cold or as much snow in the winter, so you're able to farm year-round. Okay, barley. Barley is grown primarily in the northern part of the United States. Oats are spread throughout. And then our next type of commercial agriculture is livestock ranching. And livestock ranching is common in arid areas where crops cannot grow. So in more rockier climates or landscapes and warmer climates, kind of more like desert mountain areas. And U.S. ranching grew after 1860, but declined in the 1880s. So during westward expansion, okay, you had old cattle towns in Abilene, Dodge City, Chicago, where you had ranchers that would drive herds of cattle. So livestock ranching is primarily a small number of ranchers that travel with their cattle and drive them from place to place. So like over the land, and they live off the land. And then eventually, once the cattle are ready, then they sell them to butcher shops. Okay. U.S. livestock ranching declined because there was conflict for rangeland out west, and barbed wire. So the invention and use of barbed wire led to an end of free range grazing. So now cattle are largely restricted to smaller area. They just don't get to graze as freely as they did before. So because of that, our grazing land is declining, and cattle are sent more to commercial feedlots for fattening. So if you ever go to the grocery store and you look at buying beef products, sometimes they will say like organic grass-fed beef. Those are going to be cows that were part of what we call livestock ranching. So they were able to kind of graze freely and move about as they want, versus other beef products that are product of these feedlots, where cattle are packed into a couple acres and are basically stationary until they are fat enough to sell to market. Commercial ranching is currently growing, and it's also found in the grasslands of Australia and South America. This is what your commercial feedlots look like. So it's basically just kind of like an open, flat football field of mud and dirt and cow poop, in which cows then line up and get fed out of this trough multiple times a day. So the goal of feedlots are to fatten the cattle as fast as possible to ship them off to market. This map here shows where livestock ranching occurs throughout the world. Question number 4. Outside of the United States, what other regions of the world does commercial ranching occur? The answer is all of the above: Latin America, Southern Africa, Australia, and Central Asia. Our next type of commercial agriculture is Mediterranean agriculture. And Mediterranean agriculture is often found in areas bordering the Mediterranean Sea. It's also found in California, Chile, and South Africa. So Mediterranean agriculture is the growing of horticulture, so fruits, vegetables, and tree crops, in climates that have very mild winters and hot, dry summers. So it doesn't snow in these areas. Okay. And when I think of Mediterranean agriculture, I'm thinking of the growing of olives, grapes, dates, and citrus fruits. And a lot of time you have these terraced fields that go up kind of along valleys and mountainsides. So we're talking about wine regions in Italy, France, and California. So here is our grape production in the United States, which is part of Mediterranean agriculture. Okay, plums and prunes and lemons. Okay, and this map shows wine production. So you have the Mediterranean style agriculture in the West Coast here in the United States. Okay. Chile, South Africa, all along the Mediterranean here, and then in some parts of China as well. Okay, next we have commercial gardening. Commercial gardening is also called truck farming, and this is most common in the southeast and northeastern part of the United States. And this is the growing of like crops, or growing of apples, cherries, lettuce, tomatoes, like your typical stuff that you would find in a garden, right? But it's just on a large scale. And the reason why commercial gardening is found along the eastern part of the United States is because they have longer growing seasons and they have major market access. You have major hubs along the eastern part of the United States to ship to other places. Machines are used whenever possible for commercial gardening, for the harvesting, and then human labor is often done by migrant workers. So commercial gardening is like your fresh produce when you go to the grocery store. Okay, so when we say machines, we're usually talking about tree shakers or things like this. So it's a machine that shakes the tree, and then all of the fruit or the produce falls to the ground, and then all you have to do is gather up the tarp instead of picking your apples by hand. Okay, this map shows U.S. agriculture by regions, so you can see how it changes dramatically from East Coast to West Coast. Okay, so von Thunen was a German geographer who lived in the 1800s. And von Thunen came up with this idea, okay, called the concentric model. And his model had this notion that farmers chose the crops and animals to raise based on their proximity to local markets. So farmers picked what they were going to either grow or raise depending on how close they lived to the people that were going to buy their product. Okay, so his model is based on two costs, the cost of land and the cost of transportation. So von Thunen's model is the concentric model, which basically says you have a city in the center. Okay, and then the first ring, so the closest farming that is going to be done to the city is going to be your dairy farming and your market gardens. These are things that have short shelf lives, so you need to get them to your market as fast as possible. Then the second ring of von Thunen's model is wooded lots. So you have kind of like a tree or a forest buffer area. Then your next ring, so a little bit further out, are your various crops and pasture land. So this is going to be your grain farming. And then the last ring, so the furthest ring from the city, is going to be your animal grazing. So your livestock ranching and your feedlots are going to be the furthest from the city. Okay, because your product does not have a short shelf life, right? You have a live animal product. You can keep that animal alive long enough to get it to market. So here's what we're talking about. Okay, city in the center. Then you have your gardens and your dairy and your fresh produce. Then you have trees. Okay, it's kind of like buffer. Then you have like your field, and then finally you have your animal grazing. So does von Thunen's model hold true today? Yes, it does, right? We see a lot of our dairy product and our commercial gardening closest to our major city centers or our major transportation hubs. We want to get them to market as fast as possible. And then our livestock ranching occurs oftentimes in the furthest point or the most remote areas. So how about in Minnesota? Does von Thunen's model hold true? The answer is also yes. Okay, where you are going to have your milk cows closer to your market access. In the cities, your commercial gardens or your apples are going to be closer to the city. And then the further out you get, the more grain farming you have. And finally, the furthest thing is going to be your cattle production. Question number 5. What are the two costs behind von Thunen's theory? The answer is land and transportation. So subsistence versus commercial agriculture. Again, commercial agriculture is the growing of food to make money. You're making a profit. This is oftentimes found in more developed countries. Subsistence agriculture, on the other hand, is the growing of food for personal consumption. And this is the type of agriculture that is found in less developed countries. Okay, you have a note summary that you need to complete. The first question is, how have agricultural practices changed throughout history? Question number 2, what are the characteristics of commercial agriculture? What are the different types of commercial agriculture?